hand this over to you.
All right.
Thank you very much for coming.
We'll keep the conversation going here. Good. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Greg Irwin. I'm a partner at BWG Strategy and thrilled to be joined by these gentlemen for a conversation about hacking for venture capital. We're going to provide what insight and advice we can in terms of some stories, some success, some advice in terms of companies that we've seen who've tried to make their way from early stage up the ranks into sales into enterprises. Let's let the panelists introduce themselves, a little bit about their role, and perhaps a little bit about their exposure to early stage startups in info security.
Hi, Phil Venables again. So I'm being part of a major enterprise. We don't just exclusively work with large IT companies. In fact, over many years, we've had great experience working with a lot of small companies, and just across the board. So I've been on the purchasing side and the partnering side, and helping on with some of our investment funds on the investing side as we pick these companies. Yep.
I'm David Stern, CISO for BGC Partners. I think I have the opposite. I've always worked for companies, whether it's BGC, whether it was NICE before, or whether the City of New York before that. We were always very budget tight, and so we were always looking at, start today, but looking at startups as a potential source of an initial partner who can provide a solution that maybe we couldn't afford if it were being run by a large company. And maybe we'll talk a little later about what actually happens with that. But there's definitely enormous potential. But sometimes that potential peters out fairly quickly, and we could talk about that.
Thanks. So, Tim Dawson, is this on?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. So, Cyber CTO for HSBC. Been at HSBC now for about a year and a half. And really what that role boils down to is all change the bank activity. So what do we do, how do we do it, who do we invest in, what technologies do we pick, and then how do we actually operationalize that? So, much like it's been mentioned already, some of the larger incumbents aren't always the best choices. You use them where you can, but typically at a security market, they don't move as fast as what you need. So on our side, we're engaging with every startup as much as we can through the VCs, through conferences like RSA. And it's very much around getting an understanding about what the trends are, what's up and coming, and then how do you operationalize that? How can you actually get that up and running in your own environment?
Hi, I'm Nasir Memon. I'm a professor in NYU Standen School of Engineering. And so we are at the other end of the whole chain, right? So what we try to do is sort of provide the environment and the context for students to be creative. One of the mottos of NYU Tandon is I2E, innovation, invention, and entrepreneurship. And we sort of try to live to that motto. We have hacking, innovation competitions, we have pitch competitions, we take the winners and then we put them in our incubators, and then so we teach classes in entrepreneurship. When I was a department head of computer science, I even started a class called hacking for entrepreneurship for hackers, right? It was focused more on cybersecurity, and so that's what we do. And of course, these are very bright kids. Most of them go off in different directions. And some of them actually persist and go on to a startup. Some of them drop out. But so there's a large funnel where there's a large number of kids who engage, and then slowly some of them. And our job is to cultivate that.
Great.
Thanks.
Ron?
Hi there. My name is Ron Gula. I'm the president of Gula Tech Adventures. You might know me as the person who helped found Tenable Network Security. While I was there, I really got involved with angel investing in cyber companies, including companies like WRN's ThreatGrid, and I really kind of got addicted to it. So some of y'all are addicted to cybersecurity. I love cyber tech. I love doing that. And having grown a company that's doing $250 million in revenue, I've seen both things. I've seen pre-revenue, pre-customers, all the way to, hey, how do we break the $20 million, $50 million barrier? So I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now. So looking forward to your questions.
Ron, let me start with you. One question I'd like to put out on the table is what are the minimum requirements? What should companies be working on to be able to credibly be investable and credibly be acceptable to an enterprise an enterprise that's looking to secure themselves?
So when you're starting out, you've got to be the most popular person that you can be. You got to be popular with your family, with your employees, with your investors, and with everybody on this panel here. If you rub somebody the wrong way, you could have the best mousetrap out there. You could have the best answer to some form of cybersecurity, but if you can't hold a conversation, if you can't have basic, hygiene, let's not talk about cyber hygiene. I've seen it, and you've got to know, all that kind of stuff. You have to have that confidence. But the thing I always tell people is that you've got to have that burning desire to solve something. You can't have a desire to be rich. There's nothing wrong with that, but that doesn't make you successful. You have to have that desire to solve a certain problem, be very passionate about it. And that's the biggest thing on top of all that.
Let's take that question across the panel. What's a baseline requirement for an early stage startup to be able to basically stand out among the crowd? Tim, can I go to you on that?
Yeah, so I think it has to have a valid idea. Right? So we see a lot of startups, we have a lot of pitches. Within my organization, I'll sit down and give time to anyone for half an hour just to sort of see where they're heading. And a lot of the time, you've got exceptionally bright people on the other side, right? Guys that really know their stuff, but they don't understand the rest of the market. So they come to you with a great idea. Israel, I think, represents a really good example of how this operates. You've got guys that are super bright. They take ideas out of Israeli government, 8200, those sort of areas, and they try to apply that for a corporate enterprise, and it doesn't always work. So I think one of the balances there is being able to take a step back and understand, does this actually apply? Can this be spread to 1,000 machines or networks that have multi-countries from a geography standpoint? A lot of the time, those guys miss that point. And it's those sort of conversations where you start asking more questions, it dawns on them that we haven't actually thought this through. So having that ahead of time and actually bouncing that off champions, if you will, so not necessarily a pitch, but people in your network, I think is a huge win, getting ahead of understanding where this actually lands.
I'll echo that. Operationalizing something is when you're multinational, it doesn't matter if you have more than one location. Managing these things has to be usable, and it has to play with the other tools that you have. And if it's another agent and your IT team is already saying, well, I have 12 of those, well, that's going to fail. If it's an agent because another part of IT says I don't do agents, or if it's a bandwidth hog, and so on and so forth. But I think the other piece of that as well is the economics. We have the security market. The cost of security tools, to me, the way I see it, keeps going up and up. It's not going down. And I think at some point you have to look at a tool and say, can I do that without spending as much money?
Use that as well. Sure.
Am I better off hiring somebody to do that job manually because this tool is costing me too much money? And I think that's a killer right then and there.
Great.
I think a generic thing that we always look out for is the ability of a company to focus. And so, again, I don't mean kind of relentlessly focus and ignore advice, but to actually focus on what their mission is. And one of the things, it's sometimes a bad signal if any large or small company that's talking to a small startup company says, hey, maybe you should do this, and they go, yep, we'll absolutely do that. And maybe you should, because full well there's 50 other potential customers saying the same things, and they're building up this massive list of ideas that they're going to implement, and you're not going to get your thing. And so in many respects, we'd much rather have a company say, no, this is what we're going after, and if we say, we don't really need that at this time, we want them to say, okay, we're still going after this thing, as opposed to going, well, maybe if we just do it this way, we could get you as a customer and get them as a so having some degree of focus, so you know what they're going to deliver, they're going to stay at that course. Again, not to the point of irrationality. So if we say you really have to do this for if you're going to think about being a capable enterprise deployment in a few years, but generally specific to focus. When you look back and you see a lot of companies that have done too many shifts, trying to take on too many features for too many companies, and they don't get really anything that's uniquely valuable out of the door to serve an initial market, that's usually an interesting signal.
So, just in my background, I had 10 years of product management at Lucent, and now I'm on to my second startup. And the one thing that I've learned through the startup world is it's amazing to me how technical professionals really underestimate the effort in sales and marketing. So through two tours now, I've learned that the sales and marketing effort is actually much, much, much harder and takes much more discipline and focus and investment than I think most engineers typically initially estimate. Let's go around here and maybe talk about a couple success stories. There are obviously a lot of companies that haven't made it. Maybe we could identify one or two that did a good job in terms of presenting themselves in this sector. Again, maybe we'll go this way. Phil, would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, so kind of the usual caveat is we work with lots of wonderful companies. So the one I'm going to mention now doesn't mean that they're exclusively better than all the other fantastic companies we work with. So the company we worked with for a few years who's really good is a company called Ionic Security. So they're in a number of different spaces around data protection, in and of use of the cloud, as well as providing data encryption and other protective services within the enterprise as well. One of the reasons, again, it builds on what I was just saying before. What they did really well was they came out of the gate with a product that says, we're going to do this. They'd architected it fundamentally quite well to scale into multiple different types of use cases. But what they did is they focused on that, and they focused on making sure that they weren't going to go too fast in the market too quickly. They had their first release was gated to a limited set of customers, and until they'd got those customers done and got it developed, they were refusing to take on other customers, and so that enabled them to focus, and that was a really good experience. They were also very good at pushing back against some of our more outlandish requests to take them too far too fast, and were very clear that they wanted to go in phases, and they applied some quite diplomatic discipline back to us to make sure we were only taking them too far too fast, and so that was a really good experience.
Excellent.
I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but there was one security automation company that we saw many years ago, fell in love with them, waited for them to mature a little bit. They were, again, a lot of discipline. They listened to what I was interested in, and they said, we don't have that yet. Come back to us in 6 months and then reevaluate us. So really, really had a good experience, started the POC process, and then they dropped the economics on me. And that became a year's worth of budgeting, trying to figure out, can I get these guys? And by the time I was ready to go for them, their economics increased even more. And at the end of the day, their lunch got eaten by their second best competitor, whose economics split in half. So I got burned on that, but I will say economics at the end of the day is gonna carry the show.
So that's kind of disappointing on your side, right? Because you invest all this time, you have a relationship, you try to make that work, and then you get burnt on the economics. So I think for a few of us up here, we have it somewhat easier, right? So coming from HSBC, and you've got Goldman over there, we have logos that every vendor wants. So we can kind of get what we want from a pricing standpoint at the end of the day, so they land the logo. In those sort of situations, I think there's a lesson to be learned there. People like this become your champions, right? We all have huge networks. If they're successful, word spreads very quickly. So it's not always about the logo. It's also about the relationships that you foster and how you're presented to the industry. If I go back a couple of years, one of the ones that was interesting for us was CrowdStrike, right? So George, CEO there, came to us and said, hey, I've got this Intel company. This is how it's going to work. And we said to George at the time, you know what? Intel's not that great. We've got things up and running. What you need to be focusing on is the actual endpoint side. So what exists as Falcon today, which is their core product or the core offering, we spend a lot of time working with. So their Splunk backend, the correlation rules, the events they're collecting off the operating systems, was all work that we partnered with those guys on. One of the points that Phil mentioned is the pushback. So it's healthy. We said to George at the time, you're all cloud focused, we want something on-prem. And George said, hey, it's not my vision, we're not going to do it. And that actually stagnated part of the deal, and we didn't move forward. When I fast forward to my time at HSBC, that's been saving us a lot of effort. We onboard to cloud very quickly, our data goes there. I don't need guys internally to set up 10 databases to maintain that, the skill sets required. It's been great for us. I think a few years earlier, if we actually had to push George heavily to say, go on-prem, I don't think we'd be in as good a position as it is today. So I think George had the right mindset to say no and hold his ground. And it's worked out for me personally in the long run, getting this up and running at HSBC. So I think it's always a partnership. On everything that I run with my team, best technology always wins. But a very close second is the partnership and the relationships you have with that organization. When I look at the industry, a lot of vendors take the sort of cash or king approach. So which one is it? You typically don't find one doing both. There's a few guys that stand out in the industry, exceptionally wealthy, and that's what they're about, but you know what you're getting.
Thanks. So again, coming at it from a point of view of a student trying to start a company, the One case where I saw them doing it the right way that I felt was, first of all, not taking money too early. When you're sitting in academia, there are many sources of funding internally in terms of just competitions and things like that, right? That get you going to build prototypes. And also, the National Science Foundation gives you about almost $500,000 with absolutely no strings attached, right? That you can use in order to, again, build a prototype and also try to do some market surveys and things of that sort. So that's one, and this particular team of students, they went that route. And also the second right thing they did was they understood that the marketing part is what is really the important part, and it's not simply about technology. So right from the get-go, they teamed up with business school students, right? And that created the dynamic, that created the team that really helped them then succeed as they went forward.
Great, thank you.
So when you're running a startup, there's so many things you can optimize for, right? Your personal return as a CEO, your marketplace where you are on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, your revenue, the logos. You can't do everything. So I try to tell people to understand, usually my first question to them is, what do you want? How do you define success? Because if it's your ranking in Gartner or not being acquired by Cisco, those things might not happen. So somebody who we've been working with is Samir, who's running StackRox. So about 4 or 5 years ago, we met, and he started. It's a container company. So if you're familiar about virtualization and serverless containers are in the middle. That's basically Docker type stuff, and their product is there. And most of my peers were saying, don't invest in that. The whole world's going to OpenStack or going straight to serverless, right? Docker wasn't like a thing. Nobody had done like microservices. And fast forward to today, I mean, they came in basically second at the RSA Sandbox, which is a nice kind of feather in their hat, but they also closed a $25 million round, which is good. And those were goals that they wanted. I have other companies I'm working with, they would feel like that was below what they were shooting for. So define what you want, go for it, and that's, you have to be defining what success really is.
So let's do this. Let's open it up and take some questions, and we'll keep the dialogue going. Please, I don't know that we necessarily need the mic, or you could just
use your mic, and then you're going to have to use this mic here. You can use
That sounds fun.
this one.
Test.
Gus is going
Yeah.
Seems to be a tension.
Can you use the mic, please?
I found the
Can
tools.
you hold on and use the mic?
If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Joe Friedman. I work for Intercontinental Exchange, New York Stock Exchange. So there seems to be a tension in a lot of the tools that I've used in terms of actual what they actually do, and then usability. And how do you connect it in with all your other systems, user interface, even things as simple as that. And I find that most tools just don't have that. So how do you look at that tension between, making sure you stick to your principles, but at the same time you have to make it usable for companies?
Thank you.
So it's a trade-off, right? So if you're talking to a startup, they've only been around for 6 months or 18 months, there's only so much they can build, in that time. I think it comes down to the value prop. So the problem that they're solving, is it worth you to go through the risk acceptance or the exceptions or the overhead of getting something approved that maybe doesn't have, the right access management or role-based access or separation, the right logging, and all those little things that, a more mature product would have. I think everyone here makes exceptions where they need to. If the value prop is there, it's a logical conversation to have, but it has to be a compelling, conversation.
I'll just add to that you don't want to have too much of a gap between where you want it to be and where you are today, because they likely are never going to make it full. And you have to look at yourself and say, if I own this product and I get 3/4 of what I want, am I going to be happy and am I going to get value out of it?
Yeah, it's always going to come back to that focus point again. So most, as I think especially, is most large enterprise customers, when buying a product, will want API access to it, not necessarily UI access to it. They'll want to have access to the structured data model that underpins the product. But many of the customers that company might be trying to sell to may not have the capability to do that. So they're going to have to make a choice. fairly early. I would suspect most of them will make a choice to have a front end on their product and sell it as a package in and of its own right, and later we'll have to expose that to more enterprise customers. So I think it's very difficult for some of these companies to make that choice between the two.
Thanks, Josh.
Kevin Green, formerly ran the R&D program at DHS S&T Cybersecurity Division. Now I'm at MITRE. Question is, what recommendation do you give companies who want to start doing proof of concepts with customers, and what strategies do you give to transition the proof of concepts into a billable customer? What are some of the roadblocks, and what's some strategies to get around that?
Phil, you want to take it?
Yeah. So again, it depends on the particular situation. So I think going in with a defined set of objectives for the proof of concept and what constitutes success. One of the things, and I've seen this on both sides working well and also not working well, is unless those measures of success for what gets delivered aren't agreed, it's always difficult to then there's always a little bit of a kind of a hiatus between the end of the proof of concept and the actual production deployment. And I think that's usually because there was some ambiguity around what constituted readiness for taking it to the next stage. So I think, this is a kind of a statement of the obvious that you would do with most things, not just this type of early stage product, but defining measure of success for what gets you to each stage and agreeing that up front so there's no ambiguity. There's going to be a little bit of gray areas, but generally speaking, it's surprising how much can be locked in to a fairly friendly set of well-defined measures of success.
Yeah, just a couple other ideas. There's actually a lot of stuff on the internet that you can download. So if you happen to be in a source code auditing kind of framework, there's a lot of source code out there you can audit. You'd be surprised how many companies I get pitched, hey, we can do this, we can do that. I go, can you predict Heartbleed? We know that's a thing that's out there. I have a lot of these next generation network security monitoring companies who say, oh, you got to install it on your network to really find the lateral movement. I go, there's a couple terabytes of packet capture data on the internet if you downloaded it and tried it, right? So although it's not a real proof of concept, it's like a tell that you might be able to use to get somebody here to actually say, oh, well, I'll try that on my network. That seems like something new. But the last thing is, how do you go and actually convince somebody to test your product? I think the biggest secret is free product, right? I mean, if that's the thing, hey, I want you to test this. If you like it, I want you to be a reference. I'm going to give you a year free. Now, a lot of people are nodding their heads. That's really it's kind of tough to put that into a contract. And some people who like to negotiate, if you have to actually have sold anything to some of the other organizations on the panel here, it kind of takes that all away. When you're small, you don't have time. And if you can get somebody excited about your stuff, it'll make your company.
Question in the back.
All right, so I'm going to make a next-gen blockchain, quantum, crowdsourced AI platform that looks at the deep web. I do have a serious question, though. Most of the times I hear panels with fantastic seasoned VCs or innovators, we're talking about an enterprise buyer for the economic model. One of the things that scares the bejesus out of me is there is no buyer in the hospitals that have no security staff. There is no buyer in consumer IoT. Most of this Mirai type tsunami of technical debt that takes out the internet for a day, there's no buyer. So how much of your advice goes away, or is there even a model for investment for good cyber hygiene or really good security products when there's no clear buyer or clear responsible party? We tend to just kind of talk about this with the assumptive enterprise wrapper. Is there any hope whatsoever for VC innovation money outside of enterprise? And if not, why not? And what do you want to do about it?
Yeah, so there's two reasons why I think everybody should be interested. Is that one, everybody who's running a bank or security, they have a supply chain. You go out in that supply chain and they start becoming smaller and looking like not necessarily hospitals, but people who don't have maybe even a CISO. But about half of the pitches I get just from people who find me on the internet ron@gula.tech, by the way, is going after that other market. And there's two issues with that. One, if you have a great idea, how do you make money? How do you put a little widget in somebody's house, or, hey, PCI compliance for $5.99 a month? It's hard to scale, right? But the second thing is, that's a lot of places failed enterprise tech goes. And anytime you hear about, hey, I'm a next-gen EDR company, well, the enterprise wasn't ready, so we're going to the home market. That's like a big red flag for me.
So I have a point here that, because this is something that I struggled with in building product is not just the tech, product is the whole surround. And you have to know your customer. And innovation doesn't have to be technical innovation. It could be business model innovation, or sales and marketing innovation, or delivery method innovation. So being able to solve some of those problems may actually create more opportunities.
The other thing, actually, I mean, I know you know this, but all of those types of companies have companies running parts of their operation, whether it's technology, they have a collection of managed services. And so there's always an entry point to serve those through the network of managed services companies and that can sometimes be a difficult entry point, but there's an entry point. Right?
One last question before we break.
I had one for the panel. I'm actually not really sure how to phrase this, but based on
Mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Jackie Stokes, founder of Spyglass Security, formerly at FireEye, Mandiant, Intel Security, McAfee, and most recently Accenture. So to build off of Josh's question, it just really seems like there's a huge need for kind of tailored consulting services, right? How do you tie all these products together? How do you make sure that the clients are actually extracting the most use operationally from these product stacks that they've already purchased, right? So I think that helps solve part of the gap there, but we haven't seen another Mandiant. We haven't seen another organization that maybe is a split between products and services and is able to turn that into $1 billion exit. So I would love to hear from the panel if there are any thoughts about why that is and how to repeat that success.
Great question.
I think it's a great question. I think the reason why you're not seeing startups that are half services and half product is because 2x and 10x, right? So if you make $10 million as a service company, everybody says you're worth $20 million, and if you do that as a product company, what's the math, Josh? 200, right? So that's one of the big reasons. And then we just actually chatted like just an hour ago. I think the first thing I said is don't do it. Now, the markets always change. The markets always change. I actually think people who are going to the cloud, it's going to switch back, and there's going to be a lot of on-premises stuff. So I'm looking at a lot of that. So you always can find an investor who might believe in that model, but you still have to go to the buyers. Cisco is going to value you 100% as a services company, even as a 40% product revenue company.
You have a product that you don't have any real customer success around, or maybe you have customer success and it's strictly a product-focused offering, right? You're not able to kind of wrap anything else around that to be a trusted advisor for your client, which reduces your stickiness and maintains your status as the vendor and not as trusted advisor.
I'll make one more brief comment and get everybody else. So like when Qualys first started, it was a SaaS thing. Everybody understands SaaS. SaaS equals product, right? Software as a service. When they first started, a lot of venture capital people who didn't understand them, oh, that's a consulting company. And they were lower valuations. That's false now. So you might be onto something. But right now, most things aren't that way.
So I think as a vendor side, do we ever trust you, right? There's always that part of the relationship. So, HSBC, we're huge on consultants. Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, all of them are in our organization. So there's always what motivates this person in this sort of conversation. So I think Mandiant's a really good example of, bring us in for services. By the way, buy a FireEye appliance or the, EDR. It's complementary, it makes sense, you understand that. But I think that's a very hard model to come by because the initial solicitation there is, hey, we need help from you, can you please come in? I think for most other organizations out there, they're selling consulting services where I'd much rather take that resource or that funding and invest that in my own team, my own organization, to have someone that's going to be here for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, as opposed to the typical consultant. I can say this because we're so heavy on it at HSBC, where they're in for 6 months, the interest or the bonus cycle isn't there for that person.
But isn't that related to the Big 4, Big 8 model? Isn't that directly tied? I mean, these guys have an incentive there. They also have product relationships that are very serious. So I hesitate to separate them.
because then there's a kickback model, right? Hey, use this company because we referred you, and so therefore there's a distrust, from anyone I think that knows what they're doing on the technical side. You see that very quickly, and you sort of go a little bit from a skeptical standpoint. Do an introduction, but I think getting to that Mandiant sort of FireEye model, is a tricky situation. The way that model came about in the first place, why did Dave DeWalt buy Mandiant? It's kind of an interesting story behind that, I think. Maybe. Might be 40 million other reasons behind that as well. But, I think there's, a challenge getting to that state where you're trusted, and then we trust you to actually sell a product into the company from there.
I'll just comment that for the last panel mentioned the 6,000 other or the 11,000 other financial organizations that weren't these two guys. When you're struggling to bring in, if you find that product that you really think is going to bring value, most of your money is going to go into that. And being able to then, as you said, put money into consultants who are going to be disappearing in a little while. I'm running this thing for the next 5 years, and most of the time I just have enough to buy your product itself. And consultancy is the first thing that usually gets knocked off the PO because you can't afford it.
But it's actually what you're saying is basically the as a service model, and it may be more appropriate to smaller companies that don't necessarily have the internal resource. So it may just be a different market segment target. Okay, let's wrap it up here. Thank you all for the panel.
Question.
Okay.
How many people here are in a startup? Just raise your hands. So when we're drinking tonight.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun.
Yep.